founder of Regeneration Movement and also the coordinator for Georgia-Korea Peace Campaign. Exactly 66 years ago from today, on July 27th of 1953, an armistice agreement was signed to put a temporary stop to the Korean War. While many of us forget, the Korean War still has not ended and its wounds are still deeply affecting us today, although many of us have become numb and internalized them. Today, we have wonderful speakers and panelists to discuss how we as grassroots citizens can work together to finally bring an end to this war in Korea. Now, I'd like to ask you to stand up and face the American flag. And please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Now, please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance to the Korean flag. 국기에 대하여 경례. 나는 자랑스러운 태극기 앞에 자유롭고 정의로운 대한민국의 무궁한 영광을 위하여 충성을 다할 것을 굳게 다짐합니다. 바로. It is my honor to introduce to you Mr. Jong-ho Kyun. Mr. Kyun is the Deputy Consul General of the Republic of Korea in Atlanta since August 2018. He has a long career with the Korean Ministry of Foreign Affairs, first joining in 1996 and serving at Korean embassies in Belgium, Sri Lanka, the United States, and the Philippines. Previous to his current role, Mr. Kyun was involved in G20 summits, OECD, and various international trade and investment activities as a Director of Multilateral Economic Affairs Division and Bilateral Economic Affairs Division at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, headquartered in Seoul. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Kyun.
Hi, my name is Jong Kyun, Deputy Consul General of Korean Consulate. Anyway, thank you for kind introduction, Jonathan. So, as you know, today marks 66th anniversary of Korean War Armistice. And first of all, I would like to convey our special appreciation to the Korean War veterans and their families. Koreans will remember forever 33,000 US soldiers who sacrificed their lives for the peace and democracy of Korean Peninsula. Korean War was the first hot war in the era of Cold War, and it was international war because U.S. Army fought against Chinese Army for the first time. Since then, 3 years after the war had broke out, the Armistice agreement was signed. But two Koreas have confronted each other along the military demarcation line for more than 6 decades. Actually, it's technically under state of the war. Furthermore, the recent North Korea nuclear and long-range ballistic missile program have threatened the security of Japan and the United States, as well as Korea. So it seems like the winter of the Cold War did not live on Korean Peninsula. But the situation has changed dramatically through the Pyeongchang Winter Olympic Games early last year. Two Koreas agreed upon many steps to diffusing tension on Korean Peninsula. There has been 3 rounds of inter-Korea summits, and then President Trump met the North Korean leader and discussed the position very frank ways. Some experts may criticize the second U.S.-North Korea summit in Hanoi ended without any concrete results. But I would like to say there was very that was a very useful summit in terms of fact-checking to move forward the next level of negotiation. And the recent U.S.-North Korea summit in Panmunjom was very important in terms of maintaining the momentum of diplomatic solution. I think global community witnessed that the President Trump step across MDL and then set force on the soil of North Korea. As President Moon Jae-in said, it was like North Korea and United States declared de facto declaration on the end of hostility and then beginning of new era of peace. But at the same time, we need to bear in mind North Korea nuclear issue has been one of the most difficult agenda that the previous U.S. administration could not solve. And it will take time to reach the final end. And there will be many ups and downs, definitely. But we must encourage North Korea to stay in the past. That leads to the permanent peace and then denuclearization. So I will look forward to seeing significant progress in the negotiation between United States and North Korea. And I hope there will be a continued strong support for our joint endeavor from the political and economic leader like Stan Bach. Yeah. So I hope there will be very concrete discussion today on this issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jung Kyung. And before we move on, I'd like to recognize some of the members of the state of Georgia joining us in the audience today. And here with us today, we have Representative Kim Schofield and Representative Sam Park joining us from the state of Georgia. Could you please stand? We also have Senator Gloria Butler with us. And we are also grateful for our sponsors who have made this event possible, including Eric Kyung-Yu Kim, who could not be here with us today. And thank you for all your support. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Mr. Eric Kim. Mr. Kim currently serves as the Vice President of Korean American Coalition, Metro Atlanta. He has been a community leader since college, leading the Georgia Tech's chapter of Liberty in North Korea and working to shed light on the frequently overlooked humanitarian crisis ongoing in North Korea. He currently works as a senior analyst at Carmex Auto Finance. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Kim.
Thank you, Chonde, Grace, and everyone at the Georgia-Korea Peace Movement for allowing me to come and make some remarks on behalf of Korean American Coalition. It sounds like there was a sponsor also named Eric Kim. That is not me. So thank you to the other Eric Kim for making this event possible. So my name is Eric Kim. I am the Vice President of Korean American Coalition Metro Atlanta, and it is my privilege to come make some remarks in support of this great event today. So thank you for having me again. It's great to see everyone that's gathered here from various organizations to provide expertise as well as collaboration on a discussion that I think is so important for international affairs as well as just the communities here. So I'm really grateful for this event. Typically, the Korean American Coalition focuses on events here in the United States, such as fostering civic engagement or cultivating networks within our local communities. However, we do take every opportunity to facilitate discussions that are related to the Korean American identity. In fact, this past year in our Spotlight annual event, we have a dinner event at the end of the year, and the focus of our panel was on the topic of identity. During that topic, discussion, one of the big takeaways was that if you're a Korean American, regardless of if you're very Korean or very American, whether you were born in the United States or born in Korea, whether you've only spent 1 year here or your entire life growing up here as a child, we are all impacted by the fact that we are Korean. And so the culture, history, language, and even current events of Korea impact us as Korean Americans. And so for that reason, the Korean American Coalition is in great support of an event like this where we talk about an important discussion such as peace in the Korean Peninsula. I think the reason that as Korean Americans, even if we're detached from the issues that are going on in Korea, it's very important for us to engage. Firstly, because we have interaction with people, Koreans that are direct immigrants, whether it's ourselves, whether it's our peers, whether it's our parents. We interact with these people whose histories are very much intertwined with what's going on in Korea. And secondly, being here in the United States as a Korean American, regardless of our affinity or sentiments toward Korea and Korean things, the people from the outside will automatically associate us as being Korean, and so we will automatically be linked to a lot of those things whether we like it or not. And so we are definitely, the Korean American Coalition is definitely in support of anything that continues the education of the history or culture, language, anything regarding Korea. And so really thankful for this event. Just a plug about our organization for anyone that would like to learn more about the Korean American Coalition. Please don't hesitate to talk to me after the event. There are also a couple members here from the Korean American Coalition, so please do reach out if you want to talk about anything. I do want to plug a particular event. We are hosting what we call the National Convention toward the end of this year. We are part of a national organization and there are various chapters, and each year a chapter from a different city will host the National Convention. This year Atlanta has the privilege of hosting it. And so if anyone here wants to get an idea of what the Korean American Coalition is like and what kind of organization we are, I'd encourage you to come out to our event. It's going to be October 25th and 26th. So please mark your calendars if you're interested and come talk to me. There's registration open on our website, so I'll just leave it at that. Otherwise, once again, thanks Jungjae and Grace and everyone in this coalition for hosting this event as well as having me to make some remarks. I'm looking forward to a great event. Thank you.
Much. Now I'd like to hand over to Dr. Yutan Chang, who will be moderating the panel today. Dr. Chang is an associate professor at Kennesaw State University and an adjunct professor at Georgia Tech. Outside of classrooms, he is an avid activist. Dr. Chang founded the Atlanta Korea Forum in 2010 and actively engages in local communities and international talks to promote peaceful relationship between South and North Korea and the US. In 2011, he helped organize the Track 2 Summit among the US, South Korea, and North Korea. He is an active member of National Unification Advisory Council, Atlanta chapter. Please welcome Dr. Chang.
Okay, thank you very much, Jungjae. I'm Yusan Chang from Kennesaw State University. Thanks for coming on Saturday morning. Before we start, we're going to actually have our discussion with the fantastic four panels today. So I'm going to cut my talk as a minimum, and then I would like all the panelists to actually come forward and then get seated, and then we can start our panel sessions from now on. Round of applause. Thank you very much. Okay, so we have a wonderful four panelists today. Okay, the first we'll have a very brief introduction session as an educational purpose of new development between the U.S., South Korea, and then North Korea. Armistice, and then so forth from part for about 7 to 10 minutes. And then from our each panelist, in their expertise, we're going to ask very tough questions to share their ideas and then their experience and then so forth. And then definitely I'll have a chance to introduce each one of them when they're talking. And then we're going to take questions from our general audience. If it's tough question, that's better. So we'll be prepared as long as if you're having some food, then you're responsible to ask the tough questions. Okay, so, all right, then, so, again, let me introduce Hyun Lee. Ms. Hyun Lee is the U.S. National Organizer for Women Cross DMZ and Korea Peace Now, a global woman-led campaign for peace in Korea. Ms. Lee is a writer for German Korea, an online resource for critical news and analysis on peace and democracy in Korea. She's an anti-war activist and organizer who has traveled to both North and South Korea, and also a Korean Policy Institute associate who routinely speaks at national and international conferences, as well as webinars and public seminars. Her writings have appeared in Foreign Policies in Focus, Asia Pacific Journals, and New Left Project, and she has been interviewed by Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting, the film Hetman Show, and the Ed Schultz shows, and many other news outlets. Okay, please welcome Hyun Lee.
Good morning. Thank you for inviting me to speak. It's great to see all of you out here on a Saturday morning. I'm going to be doing a PowerPoint presentation. I've been asked to talk about the Korean War itself, what is happening right now in terms of the US-North Korea talks, and why a peace agreement is so important. So those are the three things I'll be talking about. There it is. So I didn't actually think ahead about how I'm going to coordinate going to the next slide in my presentation, but so I'll be looking at the slide as we talk, and I'll do this when we're ready to go to the next slide. Okay. So first I want to ask you all a question. The Korean War is known as the Forgotten War. How many people in this audience went to high school in this country? Okay, so among those of you who went to high school here, how many of you actually learned about the Korean War in school? Only one, maybe two, maybe three. So, we can go to the next slide. During the course of the 3-year Korean War, you can go to the next, yeah. Can you actually see that text? Oh, yeah, sorry, it's too small. The US dropped 635,000 tons of explosives in Korea, mostly in the northern half of Korea. And more napalm than in Vietnam. Tons of explosives is actually more than the number of bombs it used in the entire Pacific Theater during World War II. The final death toll is nearly 5 million dead. Some people say 4 million, between 4 and 5 million. Mostly civilians, mostly Korean civilians, mostly in the north. Over 36,000 US soldiers also perished, and then hundreds of thousands of Chinese soldiers. In 1984, Curtis LeMay was the head of the Strategic Air Command during the Korean War, and he did an interview in 1984. He basically said, "We targeted everything that moved in North Korea." Next slide. Some of you may have heard of Bruce Cummings. He is a historian. He's the preeminent scholar on the Korean War because he was one of the very few scholars early on who went to the archives in Washington and actually unearthed never before seen archival material about the Korean War. And he basically said most Americans are completely unaware that we destroyed more cities in the north than we did in Japan or Germany during World War II. Every North Korean knows about this. It is drilled into their minds. We never hear about it. Next slide. The next question to the audience. When was the first nuclear crisis in Korea? Oh, it's a very educated crowd in this kind of thing. So, yeah, many people are not aware. So, if you know anything about the Korean War, so in the first months of the war, it broke out at the end of June, right? June 25th. North Korean troops came all the way down to the south, almost to Busan. So they took over almost 90% of the peninsula, right? And then in September, the US landed in Incheon and they pushed back the North Korean soldiers all the way back up, almost to the border of China. And then China was looking at the situation and said, no, they're not going to come near our border. They got involved, so they sent Chinese troops and then they started to push back. And so then the US troops started to retreat, right? It was at this moment in November, President Truman had a press conference and he was asked by reporters, he said, we will take whatever steps necessary to win in Korea. And a reporter asked, so does that include using the atomic bomb? And he said, yes. That's always on the table. And then, next slide, in April 1951, Truman actually deployed 9 nuclear bombs and atomic-capable B-29s to Okinawa. He gave General Ridgway authority to use the bombs if he felt he needs to. And then in October of that year, there was Operation Hudson Harbor, which is basically the US Air Force conducting mock air drills over the Korean peninsula, atomic bomb runs with dummy bombs. So this, in fact, was the first time there was the possibility of the use of nuclear weapons on the Korean peninsula. So some people refer to this as the first nuclear crisis in Korea. Next slide. And then many of you know, exactly 69 years ago from today, on July 27th, there was an armistice by the warring parties. They established the 38th parallel and the DMZ. And an armistice is basically a temporary ceasefire, right? We're not going to fight anymore. But the important thing is there's no final peace settlement. Meaning the warring parties are still technically at war even today. So why is this history important? I think whether you remember this history or not will actually have a huge impact on how you see the current situation. So we can go to the next slide. So for people in Washington who don't remember this history, they understand the origin of the current conflict to be when North Korea started to make nuclear weapons. So in their minds, the solution to the current conflict is we have to get rid of North Korea's nuclear weapons. On the other side of the table, for North Koreans who remember that history, and they have been taught this history from childhood, and they always remember this history, they understand the problem to have started way before. And in their mind, the fact that the Korean War is not finished, this is at the root of the problem. So that's why when they come to the negotiating table, they're always placing so much emphasis on we need to end the war, we need to build new relations, build trust, right? That's what they're always talking about. So in some sense, that's why the talks have been so difficult, because when the two sides get together, they're actually talking apples and oranges, right? They're talking about two different things, which is why it's so hard for them to come to an agreement. So next slide. Until just 1 month ago, the US-North Korea talks were completely deadlocked, right? And it seemed like there were no possibilities for an opening. So you'll remember in Vietnam in February, the two sides met and the US said to North Korea, we want fully dismantling North Korea's nuclear infrastructure is our goal, including chemical and biological warfare program related to dual-use capabilities and ballistic missiles, launchers, associated facilities, everything. We want everything gone. So in essence, this is, some people refer to this as the Libya model of denuclearization. This is especially the type of denuclearization that Bolton likes. And North Korea said no thank you, and they couldn't agree, so they left with no deal. A few months later, Kim Jong-un, the previous slide, Kim Jong-un made a speech in April. He said, in the future I will put my signature on an agreement only when it's fair. If the US sticks to its current way of calculation, the prospect for problem solving will be bleak and very dangerous. I think the Korean to English translation of the speeches are sometimes sounds a little bit funny to us, stylistically. But anyway, what he's saying is, we will not talk again unless the US gives up this all or nothing approach, right? So it seemed even 1 month ago that the two sides' positions may be irreconcilable. And I really thought, that we could actually slide back to what we had in 2017, which was fire and fury exchange of nuclear threats. So it sounded like it could be a very dangerous situation, we could be headed to a dangerous situation. And then, somehow on June 30th, there was a summit between the two leaders at Panmunjom. And this was very unexpected. It was literally organized overnight. That kind of summit organizing is unprecedented. Who organizes a summit 24 hours in advance, right? So how is this possible? I think it is maybe possible that the US position could be changing. And the reason why I say this is because Stephen Biegun, who is the US envoy to North Korea, he made some statements in the lead up to the summit that gave us this indication. So at the Atlantic Council on June 19, which is about 10 days before the summit, he said, we need a flexible approach. Steps on denuclearization need to proceed in context with broader discussions of security guarantees and improved overall relations. This is very different from what the US said in Vietnam, and then also subsequent comments that Bolton made and Mike Pompeo made. So it's an indication that maybe the US side is changing their position on their on the talks. Next, motivating factor. So a lot of people base their assessments on the prospects for these talks based on the personalities of Trump and Kim, right? I hear a lot of people say, this is not gonna work because Trump is unreliable, right? Or some people say, how can we trust Kim Jong-un? This will never work, right? So a lot of people think about, the first thing they think about is their personalities to base their assessments, which I think are important factors because this process has been so top-down, led by the two leaders, so of course their personalities are important. But I also want to suggest that there are two other factors that are motivating factors that's actually bigger than their individual personalities, right? So one thing is that this is one of those rare historic moments where there is an alignment of interests of the three different parties, right? So first of all, President Trump, he actually needs to be able to say, I did something, pursued a policy that led to some great positive achievement because he has an election coming up next year, right? So demonstrating some sort of progress in the US-North Korea talks is actually very important to President Trump. On the other hand, for Kim Jong-un, he has been saying all along, our country's priority, we want to move forward on economic development. But in order to do that, he needs to solve this problem with the United States, right? So for him, also, this is very important. And then for President Moon Jae-in, his priority has been restarting the economic cooperation and engagement between North and South. And his party also faces an election next year. He needs to show progress in this. So all three parties actually have an interest in coming to some positive progress in the talks, and their interests are aligning. So that's one motivating factor. Another motivating factor that's actually greater than these three people is the US-China contest, right? So many of you know that China is initiating the One Belt, One Road initiative. It has grand plans of creating this vast network that spans, many countries in Asia, in Europe, connecting the transportation networks and the economic hubs of all of these countries with China at the center. And the United States also sees the US Pacific region as a very important geostrategic region and sees this as a big threat to US interests. Now, it is in this context that North Korea has said, let's resolve to the United States, let us resolve our differences. But if not, then I will meet with Xi Jinping, I will meet with Putin, and we will strengthen our military and economic ties. So if you have North Korea, Russia, China, who are all now nuclear powers, aligning in that region, this is actually not advantageous for the United States' interests, right? So this is maybe another reason that is a motivating factor for Washington looking at the region to say, maybe it's better to resolve our differences with North Korea, put that aside. Korea should take a neutral position in the US-China conflict, and then the US-China can duke it up in terms of their control over the region. So that is actually a motivating factor that many people don't talk about, but something that we need to be mindful of. So at any rate, because of all these reasons, the talks are moving ahead, but there are some challenges, and I'm almost coming to the end. So the main challenges that I see are, number one, Mr. Bolton. We all know that he, from the beginning and until now, and probably forever, always and forever, will say, we need to turn to the military option in North Korea. He still thinks, even after all the summits, he still thinks the military option is the best option in Korea. And he was just in Korea and Japan, probably still scheming with people there, we need to attack. This is a very dangerous situation, so that I think, and he's still very persistent, so he has not been sidelined completely, so I think that's one challenge. The next challenge is that we do have the 2020 elections coming up, and we have very partisan politics in Washington. Whatever President Trump does, the Democrats don't like it. And so sometimes, even though the Democrats are usually the anti-war party and are usually the party that promotes diplomacy, many of them will say, they will take an even more hawkish position than President Trump on this issue, just because Trump is the one who's leading it. And I agree, there are many things not to like about Trump, but on this issue, I think there could be a bipartisan seeing eye to eye. But that is a reality that we have to contend with. And then the third thing is, all of you know that there were some missile tests that the North Koreans did. This was actually in response to US and South Korea saying we are going to go ahead with the military exercises next month. It's called Dongmaeng 92. It used to be called Uchi Freedom Guardian, and then they created a new name for this military exercise. They're saying they're going to go ahead with it. So then North Korea says, well, if you're going with the military exercises, we may actually pursue ballistic missile, long-range missile tests and nuclear tests. So this is actually a very dangerous situation. Undermining the freeze agreement could actually derail the diplomacy that is actually very fragile. So last slide, what I want to suggest is that for my organization, for Women Cross DMZ and the Korea Peace Now campaign, we believe a key part of the process of the talks has to be ending the Korean War and negotiating a peace agreement. Because really at the root of the crisis is that the parties are still at war, right? And so we want irreversible denuclearization. At the same time, we should have irreversible peace also. Because it is the only thing that will guarantee security for North Korea, for US troops, for the people in the region, 80 million Korean people. Their lives are at stake if there is a threat of nuclear war. 28,000 US troops still on the Korean peninsula. It's also what will save all of us from the threat of nuclear war. I know a man named Leo Chang, he lives in Amherst, Massachusetts. He's now 83 years old. He is bedridden. He is the fourth son of Chang Myeon, who is the former prime minister of South Korea. He recently said to me, I don't have many days left. My dream before I pass is to see the end of the Korean War. I think that right now, because of all of the reasons I discussed earlier, we have maybe a very rare opportunity, maybe an opportunity we may not get for another 20, 30 years, to finally see a resolution to the Korean War. And so we really need to push forward in this moment to end the Korean War. Thank you.
It is indeed difficult problems. It's been almost 70 years since Korean War, and still family members cannot see each other. Even though we made a lot of progress recently, still it's ongoing problems. And I wonder what kind of activities we could do as a civilians. And I would like to ask Hyun to discuss further about her experience in terms of House Resolution 152, also nationwide advocacy efforts. So would you share some of those, your experience?
So next slide. We have launched a campaign called Korea Peace Now, and it is a global campaign. You can go to the next slide. Global campaign, we have partners in South Korea, a coalition of women's organizations in South Korea, and then also Nobel Women's Initiative, or women who are Nobel Peace Prize winners, who also want to see an end to the Korean War. So we are collaborating together. But in the US, we have launched also a campaign to end the Korean War, and our goals are basically two things. One is we want to shift the discussion in Washington. Yes, denuclearization is important, but it should not be the only goal. We should also be talking about peace, right? So we want to start to talk with people, in our elected representatives in Washington, and say why peace is so important. The second thing is we are organizing a national network to advocate for peace in Korea. So how are we doing this? So there are a few strategies. The next slide. The first thing is organizing. So we now have chapters in Atlanta. Lindsay and Jongdae and Professor Chung are all part of it. Also in Boston, Chicago, Denver, Honolulu, Los Angeles, New York, Philadelphia, San Francisco, Washington, D.C. So we are now all forming chapters in these different cities to work together. So actually, today's event is part of national actions. So later today in Los Angeles, there will be a similar event like this. In front of the White House today, there is a vigil to call for an end to the Korean War. And in New York last night, there was also an event. So events happening all around the country. The second thing that we are doing is advocacy. So mainly around House Resolution 152. So we worked with some members of Congress to introduce this resolution calling for an end to the Korean War. Right now we have 35 co-sponsors. Sadly, nobody from Georgia yet. So we need all of your help to reach out to representatives in Georgia to build more co-sponsors on the resolution. The second thing is the National Defense Authorization Act that that Congress is about to pass. There were many amendments attached to the NDAA. Amendment number 217 is actually explicitly saying it is a sense of the U.S. Congress that the Korean War should be over. This is, even though it is one amendment among 400 some amendments to the NDAA, it is actually very important to us and very significant because it's a historic first. It is the first time in history that the US Congress has ever said we should end the Korean War. So that is a very important amendment. We hope it makes it through to the final version, which we don't know when they'll be voting on. And then, what else? The next thing, is facilitating dialogue between lawmakers in Washington and in Seoul. This is also a very important part of our work, trying to get members of parliament in South Korea and members of Congress here to start to talk about ending the Korean War. And then the last thing is looking ahead to the 2020 election, just making sure that all of the Democratic campaigns have the right talking points on this issue and that they will not be saying things that are more hawkish than President Trump. So that is the work that we're doing, and then I think the next slides are just some pictures to give you a sense of the type of people who are involved in this work. So in the center is Congressman Ro Khanna from California, and meeting with his constituents there. He is the one who actually led the introduction of the resolution. So that's the Korea Peace Now chapter in San Francisco. The next slide is, you are familiar with folks here, folks from Georgia 1, Jongdae and Grace, Hee-kyung. Who are you meeting with actually? Which office? Oh, Purdue. Senator Perdue's office, that's right. And then the next slide. So on the very left is the folks in Los Angeles. In the center is Ayanna Presley meeting with her constituents in Boston. On the right, that's me with Rashida Tlaib. And then the next slide. So on the left are women parliamentarians from South Korea who came to Washington to meet with our favorite, Andy Kim from New Jersey. On the right is Congresswoman Barbara Lee and Congresswoman Jan Schakowsky from Illinois meeting with South Korean lawmakers. And then I think one more slide. Oh yeah, meeting with Bernie Sanders. So I think that's, so that is the campaign, and I'll take more questions.
Okay. And in that sense, we would like to also hear some of our Georgia grassroots, the leader of the organization, Georgia Want, and Asian American Advancing Justice. So I'll first ask Lindsay, after introduce her, about what history lessons of grassroots actually engagement made any differences in legislative process. Also, I'll ask some questions later to the James Wu. So first, let me introduce Lindsay Hopper. Ms. Lindsay Hopper currently serves as Executive Director for Georgia Want, Women Action for New Directions. In January 2018, she became the first woman of color to hold the director level position within the administrative area of the organization. In September 2018, she made more history as the first Black woman to become the Executive Director. Lindsay has worked for several years to implement sustainability projects and programs that generate positive images of communities of color empowered the global community through education. Lindsay believes that economic empowerment through business education and community development is the strongest weapon to promote peace and combat the systematic damage war can cause in all of us. Okay, please go ahead, Lindsay.
Good morning. Thank you, Son. I appreciate it. Good morning, everyone. My name is Lindsay Harper. I'm really, really glad to be here today and to be able to share this day. It's wonderful. Really interesting friends and colleagues that I've been able to meet and learn from and look forward to meeting, learning more from going forward. This has personally been a very interesting and really expanding my mind opportunity to learn what coalition building really looks like across community. Yes, in the work that I've done in my past has been, communities, perhaps like African American communities or perhaps Latinx communities, but really working across in Korean American communities has been really a great opportunity. Learning how to continue as an organization, Georgia One, continue building across multiple spaces, communities, stakeholders, as we are all really building towards peace. I tell people that the work that Georgia One does is really around inequitable public spending. It's really about the value of how we spend our money in this country. Over half of the discretionary budget, the federal budget, goes towards the Pentagon, goes towards militarization, goes towards bombs, goes towards bullets. And that spending and that rhetoric, my button is bigger than yours. It's not only impacting people in North Korea, in the Korean Peninsula, in Iran, but it's also deeply affecting people here in Georgia, South Carolina, and the Southeast region. A lot of people don't know that here in Georgia, we are living in a community. There are communities in Georgia living downwind and downstream from not only a newly being built nuclear energy facility here in Georgia, but it's also downwind and downstream from a nuclear weapons facility in South Carolina, right across the Savannah River. So we've got not only nuclear, we've got an entire nuclear weapons and nuclear energy complex right here in the Southeast. We've got federal loan guarantees going towards the nuclear energy here in Georgia. And we've also got, as I mentioned, over half of our entire discretionary federal budget going towards the nuclear weapons facility, and some of that money is going towards the Savannah River site in South Carolina. And so I say all that to say that there is a wealth of opportunity and experience here in Georgia to build, again, relationships across communities living in nuclear communities, and also with our Korean American coalition partners and communities living here in Georgia who can speak directly to their families and communities living in the Korean Peninsula that are also living in a nuclearized space. Inequitable spending. You've got people living in North Korea that don't have the economic opportunity to thrive. You've got communities also in Burke County, inequitable spending. They don't have the economic resources to thrive. And so again, utilizing the opportunities to share these kinds of parallels here in Georgia, but also working with coalition partners such as Asian Americans Advancing Justice Atlanta. A few years ago, we were honored to work with James in really asking questions and getting information around U.S. and Korean Peninsula foreign relations and Korean American communities here in Georgia with a survey and focus groups that James did excellent work in translating those into Korean so that we were able to then pull together and kind of analyze what we got. We found was a treasure trove of information, and again, thinking about the lived experiences of our constituents here in Georgia, we have an opportunity to educate our representatives, such as Senator Johnny Isakson, who's on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, who can then help to inform a process around peace in the Korean Peninsula. So that's kind of how we're working, an example of how we work across the community. Again, and having had an opportunity in March to work with the Korea Peace campaign and got an opportunity to go to meetings with Grace and with Yusun and with Crystal, and again, speak with our representatives, sharing information around. We've got communities living in with similar economic situations, circumstances here in Georgia and in the Korean Peninsula. And so how can we again build relations, help to inform the process and support HR 152? And then again, when Georgia won along with the Alliance for Nuclear Accountability, another one of our coalitions, we made sure to go into meetings and educate our elected officials again on HR 152 and the importance of peace in the Korean Peninsula. So I say all that to say that there is a wealth of experience here in Georgia. There is a wealth of knowledge of people who can come across communities and rural communities. Black folks, white folks, Korean American folks can come together as Armistice came together with different folks coming to the table to create something. I think that we can do that again. And so again, I'm really, really looking forward to working more with the campaign, with my coalition partners, with our elected officials, and moving this forward together. Thank you.
We also have James Wu, who is working really hard in Asian American advancing justice. Let me first introduce him. Mr. James Wu is a marketing and IT manager at Asian Americans Advancing Justice in Atlanta chapter. Prior to working for Advancing Justice in Atlanta, James worked for the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, UNESCO, Category 2 organizations, Asian Pacific Center of Education for International Understanding in Seoul, South Korea. He has also spent time studying and volunteering abroad in countries including China and Costa Rica. James is committed to building peace from the bottom up and advocating for the rights of all the people. Now the question is, James, since you've been involved in a lot of activities and you made changes in the legislation process, now why people in Georgia should care about the peace in South, in the North and in the U.S. with Korea as a relationship too? So would you elaborate a little bit more about that?
So just very briefly, Asian Americans Advancing Justice, we're the first and only legal advocacy organization that's dedicated to fighting for civil and human rights of Asian Americans, Pacific Islanders, and Native Hawaiians in Georgia and the Southeast. If you go to the next slide. We're part of a national affiliation that works to protect and promote civil and human rights of immigrants through policy advocacy, legal services, organizing and civic engagement, as well as litigation effort. So, as you mentioned, like why our work matters. So, with everything going on in larger context of North Korea, South Korea, and United States, to bring it back to why our work matters within Georgia context is because Asians are the fastest growing ethnic minority group in Georgia and around the country. The South has seen an explosive rate of population growth. Now people talk about Atlanta having the third biggest Korean town in the United States. Our numbers continue to increase, and now we have our numbers continue to double, and we make up more than 4% of the total population. And in certain parts of the country, counties, like such as Gwinnett, we make up more than 10%. So this all means that our population are continuing to grow, and we're making changes. So how does this changes make effect? AAPI population, so AAPI stands for Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. Our population growth rate since 2000 is over 131%. Our numbers are continuing to grow, and 250,000 AAPIs are eligible to vote. So our vote matters, and in 2018, we always continue to talk about coalition effort with the help of 30 different organizations, including Korean American Coalition, Korean American community as a whole. We work to make sure that our numbers continue to grow, and we more than doubled the AAPI vote in 2016, and close to triple the number in 2018 for the gubernatorial election. This all means that there is a clearly changing sign in the South, and legislators, electeds are listening. We do have the numbers, and individually you have the power. We make up, like I said, close to 4.5% of the total population, and like I said, in API concentrated areas, we make up more than 10%. So, now people are starting to see the change. In the gubernatorial elections or even prior, the people who are running for office, they're creating in-language materials. In Georgia, only in Gwinnett County, they provide in-language ballots in Spanish. However, different candidates are providing materials in Korean, Chinese, Vietnamese, and these are all due to the fact that more people are registering and going out to vote, and people are actually seeing our changes. So, because our organization also runs a candidate training, and whenever we have electeds come and speak, they always mention, electeds listen to voters. Your vote matters, and because you're a voter, that means you have more chance and voice to speak out and also make changes and make them hear. So, vote is one part. The other part is everyone has rights. One thing is clear is that whether you're a citizen, green card holder, or undocumented, we all have rights. And the most significant change you can do is to make that voice heard. One of the things that when we talk about policy and legislations, individual voices really matter. Every year, Georgia, we face anti-immigrant legislations, whether it's English only or other bills that's trying to harm immigrant community as a whole. But we continue to fight it with the help of individuals and community members because these are ones that's affecting us the most. The clear example we had from last year? Yeah, last year was SB 452. It was a legislation that was trying to increase police cooperation with immigrant enforcement. So when these kind of anti-immigrant bills happen, we mobilize, we gather community members through petitions, signing online, actually calling the governor and legislators to tell them to make those actions reverse. And these kind of grassroots efforts actually make a difference because we were able to defeat all these anti-immigrant legislations year after year because we mobilize, we make our voices heard. And another example that I just wanted to touch upon for a lot of the Korean Americans here was last year we actually had a language access lawsuit. So a little bit of context is in Georgia, if there is no federal candidate on the ballot, you're not supposed to, or you're not allowed to have an interpreter at the polls who does not live in the same district at the same polling place, or if you're a family member. So that means you cannot have your friend or volunteers from organizations like KAC or Advancing Justice come and help you at the polls, even though they don't provide in-language access. We were able to overturn that rule because a single individual spoke out. Mr. Kwon, he was a frequent voter. He voted in many of the elections because last year there was Korean candidates running. He was really invested in making difference because he was able to get in-language help from organizations like us. But when he found out that in a local election where there was no federal candidate, they told him to turn back because at the poll, he was not allowed to vote with the interpreter because of this rule. So he actually, with the help of our litigation team, took it to court and actually spoke out about his case and the injustice that he faced at the polls because he couldn't vote with an interpreter even though he was limited English. So because of single individuals speaking out against the case, they were able to make the change and abide by the federal law. And now across Georgia, on every election, whether it's local or federal, you're allowed to take any interpreters of your choice to the polls. With few exceptions, whether it's not having like a labor union with you. But beyond that, these are the changes that individuals can make as a whole. And I mentioned this because when we have a campaign, when we, as a Korean community, come together with a single issue, we can definitely make our voices heard by calling our electeds, calling our legislators to make them hear that we need Korean and peace.
Thank you very much, James. So we heard from our two leaders about their grassroots activities. Also, we heard from Hyun about the nationwide advocacy activities. These are all important to push and promote our more peaceful relationship between the nations. However, eventually it has to go through the Congress. We were very close in 1994 in Geneva, and then those nations actually got together to make agreement in 1994. And the things that we are wanting right now, like ending the wars and then make peace treaty, all those good things were actually there, but it didn't really go through the Congress in 1994. So it is very important, these types of grassroots level, also at the same time nationwide level, but it has to go through the Congress. So here, I'm very glad to have with his very busy schedule, the Sam Park, Representative Sam Park in Georgia, to share his wisdom to get also bipartisan support. Eventually will promote peaceful relationship between the nation. Let me introduce Sam Park first. So Representative Sam Park is a native Georgian born and raised by a single mother who instilled in him the importance of faith, family, and hard work. So Sam's grandparents were refugees from the Korean War who moved to the United States in the early 1980s in pursuit of the American dream. On the platform of expanding and medicated to ensure access to healthcare for all Georgians, Sam ran for office as a first-time candidate in 2016 and unseated a three-term Republican chairwoman with a grassroots campaign to become the first Asian American Democrat and first openly gay man elected to the Georgia State Legislature. Sam's commitment to serving others and passion for good public policy have been driving forces in his professional and political career. During his first term as a legislator, Sam introduced comprehensive civil rights legislation, co-sponsored registration to expand Medicaid in Georgia, and defeated a discriminatory legislation targeted at minority communities. Sam currently serves as a deputy whip in the Georgia House Democratic Caucus and a vice chair for the Gwinnett State House delegation. Okay, so Sam, would you share your wisdoms to us?
Good morning, thank you for having me. Before I started, I wanted to give a shout out to a few of my colleagues who are here, Representative Kim Schofield and Representative Brenda Lopez, who is also a candidate for the 7th Congressional District. So I wanted to start off just kind of giving a lay of the land, as well as discuss some of the opportunities that exist in the Georgia State Legislature. So in Georgia, Republicans control all three branches of the governor's mansion, the Senate, as well as the House. In the House specifically, which is the chamber in which I serve, there are 105 Republicans to 75 Democrats. So there is a strong Republican majority, which means that there has to be bipartisan support in order to move anything forward, for the most part. As James had mentioned earlier, our state has also passed a lot of very harsh anti-immigration legislation. Going back to 2012, when Georgia passed one of the harshest anti-immigration laws that ended up causing an enormous amount of economic damage, especially in our agricultural sector. We have made progress in terms of how legislators treat immigrants. Earlier this year, for example, there was bipartisan celebration and support for immigrants and refugees. We were also successfully able to pass a resolution with the help of both Republicans and Democrats that would urge the President of the United States, as well as the Congress and the Georgia congressional delegation, to pass legislation to close a loophole that affects international adoptees, or folks who are internationally adopted by American citizens whose citizenship status fell through. And so again, there is bipartisan support to address some of these initiatives going forward. I think going into the 2020 legislative session, there will be another great opportunity to begin having a conversation regarding having another resolution from the Georgia State Legislature passed that urges the U.S. Congress to pass H.R. 152, urging a peaceful resolution of the Korean War. That said, it requires a lot of relationship building. You have to lay the foundation by individually meeting with leaders of both parties to ensure that there is support from both parties in moving this issue forward. You don't want to act unilaterally. One thing that I've learned serving in the Georgia State Legislature for the past 3 years is coalition building. Coalitions is key to either moving legislation forward or stopping legislation that we may think harmful. That idea of coalition building is just as important outside the legislature. So hopefully we will be successful next year in the Georgia House and the Georgia Senate in moving a resolution forward. But of course, we also face our own re-elections in November of next year. That will be a critical component to ensuring we have accountable representation. It's an opportunity for all of us here in this room to elect leaders who will serve the people, who will listen to your concerns, who will spend time understanding an issue that you care about, such as this, in order to make progress, not just in this window of opportunity in which we have, but in the long run, right? Especially as the Korean American community continues to grow and strengthen in political power. That said, there is responsibility that falls on citizens and Korean Americans here today, right? It's a fantastic thing that our community is rapidly growing. But if we are not registering to vote and voting every single election, the power that you wield over your elected officials, the influence that you have over your state representatives, over your congressmen and women, over your senators is diminished. And so there is a fantastic opportunity for Korean Americans to really get engaged and make sure that this is not an issue that comes and goes, but so long as you continue to participate in the political process, so long as your elected officials know that you will hold them accountable, hold their feet to the fire, there will be an opportunity there to make progress in the long run to ensure a peaceful resolution and ensure peace on the Korean Peninsula. That said, the last thing that I'll mention in that capacity is the census as well as the importance of the 2020 congressional election. Depending on who wins next year in the Georgia House, that will determine not just what politics in Georgia will look like over the next 10 years, till 2030. It will also determine the composition of our congressional delegation for the next 10 years. So what happens is every 10 years, according to the United States Constitution, there is a census taken. That census will occur next year. Based on the results of that census in the 2020 November elections that will determine who is in control of the redistricting process, the maps will be completely redrawn in 2021. The maps for who your congressman is, or who your state senator and your state representative is, all of that will be determined next year. And so this is a critical period of time for anybody who wants a government that is accountable to the people, that will listen to people's concerns, to get involved. And at the very least, to register to vote, to ensure your family is registered to vote, and to vote. Again, we have the power to ensure that we make progress on this issue. But when all is said and done, it is our responsibility and our individual choice as to whether or not we use that power. And so hopefully, I would urge that we do just that.
Talk about involvement, engagement, and then we're not really asking you any questions to ask those panelists, right? So we're going to actually give you opportunities to ask tough questions. The tougher, the better. Okay. So, but let me start with them first. So, anyone, okay. Now we're talking about a lot of activities in local level, grassroots levels, and also nationwide advocacy efforts, and also Representative Sandberg Georgia House, and eventually it has to go all the way to the Congress. Now, what's the most difficult part? Why this is not really being solved yet? You're doing a lot of things and a lot of work, but still it's not being solved in almost 70 years. Some other countries like Vietnam, they fought really hard against the U.S. in the 60s and 70s, but then just after 15 years and 20 years later, they normalized the relationship. People can go back and forth, but then in South Korea, North Korea, nothing happening. Even though we made a lot of progress, but then still it's totally stuck there, right? So what is the root of the problems? And then when you are doing a lot of activities, and then what's the most significant difficult part, and how would you address these problems to solve in positive way? What's your strategies and your wisdom to solve that problem? Anyone?
I could start off on that. For me, I think it's a lack, at least from the part of the United States, I think there's been a lack of a cohesive long-term plan in which we are regularly taking steps regardless of the administration, regardless of the politics, because this is a national security issue that ought to be nonpartisan. That said, perhaps one of the underlying contributing factors as to why there's been a lack of a long-term plan is because there haven't been people pushing and advocating elected officials to focus on this issue and to work on this issue. One of the things that I think is so true, but not really understood or implemented, is the need for an electoral change or for a community to be more engaged in the long run. Politicians are always going to be short-sighted to a certain degree. Right? We're always going to be focused, we're elected every 2 years. So we're focused on ensuring that we have an opportunity to serve for another 2 years. And accordingly, there may not always be a focus or an opportunity to talk about international issues, especially at the domestic level. That said, that's where, again, the community is so important, right? If this is an issue that the Korean American community, and we are a very large community, especially here in the Metro Atlanta area, if this is an issue that we truly care about, every single election, especially for state legislature and for Congress, right? This should be something that we talk about. This should be something that we continue to advocate for peace, which is beneficial and necessary for everybody's well-being. And so again, as a leader and as an elected official, while it's important and what I will do and what other leaders will do is continue to try and advocate, ultimately I think if you want to ensure long-term movement on this issue, it will require continual engagement by the people themselves.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. We're gonna hear only one more from our panelists. Is anyone? Go ahead.
I'll just add just briefly. Like Hyun said, how many of us actually studied Korean War and the issues in high school? Not many. Education is so important because as Korean Americans or as Koreans, we understand this issue better than anyone else. Right? We actually are invested. We actually care about these issues. So it is part of our responsibility to go out and educate the others on this issue. And with that, we can advocate, we can actually, push forward with the peace process, but unless people are educated and understand the issue at heart, people are not going to actually care to move forward with any of these issues.
Okay.
Thank you very much, James. Okay, so I will stand up. It's not because of my recent back problems. I would like approach to you to if you have any questions. So I'm gonna hand over this mic to you. Tougher questions is better. You'll have more food there, and then also things. Okay. So any questions from your audience? From the audience. Okay. All right. One second.
통역 가능하세요? 네, 저는 미국에 사는 한국 사람으로 동양 사람으로서 그동안 계속해서 저한테 그 투표권 있을 때마다 그 민주당이 그래도 인간에 대한 존엄성에 대해서 같은 의견을 갖고 있다 생각을 해서 계속해서 투표를 하고 있었는데 지금 좀 갈등이 생기는 거예요. 왜냐면
Can we translate so far what you
Yes,
said?
yes, please,
So as a
thank you.
Korean living in this country, I have always voted for the Democratic Party, but now I am starting to have an internal conflict.
네, 그 이유가
The reason
지금
is
저는 미국 사람이지만 한국에 뿌리를 두고 있고 또 한국에 어떻게 나가는 거에 따라서 제 삶의 입지가 달라지는 걸 경험을 오랫동안 했거든요.
because even though I'm a U.S. citizen, I still have roots in Korea, and I have experienced that what happens in Korea really has an impact on my life here.
네, 그런데 지금 아까 그 이 선생님께서 말씀하신 것처럼 그 민주당이 트럼프가 하는 것에 대해서 그 이유를 불문하고 반대를 하는 입장을 가지고 있다는 걸 모르는 사람이 없잖아요.
And as we all know, the Democratic Party is very opposed to anything that President Trump does these days.
그리고 지난번에 물론 그 하원에서 그 종전을 그 뭐라 그러죠? 종전을 NDAA 한다고 그 얘기를 하긴 했지만은 조금 전에 말씀하신 것처럼 우리가 지금 이런 문제를 당면은 하고 있지만 아까 말씀하신 것처럼 왜 해결이 되지 않고 있느냐 하는 부분도 사실은 그런 뜻을 갖고는 있지만 그 액션을 택하는 데 있어서 그 이유가 아직까지는 서로한테 좀 부족하기 때문에 그런 것 같은데 제가 지금 질문을 드리고 싶은 건 그러면 그 쌤님이 아까 말씀하신 것처럼 민주당으로서 저희가 뭔가 이렇게 확실하게 그러니까 투표권을 가진 사람들을 움직일 수 있는 그런 플랜이 있으신지 그리고 저희는 진짜 원하는 게 빨리 종전을 하고 그 다음에 저희가 입지를 살림으로 해가지고 이게 한반도 평화만 아니라 세계 평화로 이어진다는 거를 계속해서 듣고 있거든요. 그럼 그것을 저희가 오늘 이렇게 좋은 그 교육의 현장을 가진 것처럼 계속해서 그러니까 저희가 종전을 위한 모임이 아니라 종전 이후에 나아갈 길을 마련할 수 있는 그런 준비가 되어 있으신지 그게 제 질문이에요.
So he said, I really want the end of the Korean War because I believe that this is what will lead to global peace. What I really would like to hear from Representative Sam Park is, does the Democratic Party have a plan, not only to end the Korean War, but after we end the Korean War, what is the plan for lasting peace in Korea?
That is a very tough question, and I do not have myself a solution, a silver bullet. That said, I think we could look at history and see some of the ways in which we've been able to peacefully resolve and ensure long-term stability in regions in which there was internal conflict. One of the keys, in my opinion, would be ensuring economic ties and relations that exist in the North and the South. I think this would be, passing House Resolution 152 would be a good first step, and ensuring the North Korean regime understands that there is an opportunity to begin moving forward. I think South Korea and the South Korean administration and the people, it is going to be incumbent upon them to ensure that there is an opportunity for there to be economic relations that continue to grow and continue to build upon. It is a long-term issue that will take, perhaps another 10 to 20 to 30 years to truly resolve. But I would agree with you. I think, especially on an issue like this, we cannot allow partisan politics to get in the way of making progress on such an important issue. That said, I think as an individual voter, a good next step that you could take would be to reach out to your congressman or woman. And I'd be more than happy to try and find out who that is for you. And ask them, will you co-sponsor House Resolution 152? As this is a bill that is still moving forward. They may not be educated on the issue, right? But at the very least, because we have this opportunity as an initial phase, or to begin truly meaningful conversations and actions on resolving this issue, that begins with this resolution. And again, it goes back to the reality, especially given the political economics, the political structure in which we operate, that you can have an enormous influence on your congressperson in moving this issue.
Thank you. This question is for Ms. Lee. Now, you clearly laid out and pointed out that the three leaders that you showed on the screen have political motives for doing anything. Motives for ever even coming together to talk. And you laid out a strategy for a campaign as well. Outside of that, what would you suggest that we could do? Because if you can't get around the political part and you can't get around the politics, then it's really hard to make what you want to happen happen.
Yeah, I think whoever's in the White House, and it could be different come next November, right? Whoever's in the White House, whatever agreement is reached between North Korea and the United States, in order for that agreement to be sustained, it needs the support, one, of the American people, and two, of Congress, right? It cannot be just a deal between the administrations, because we saw what happened with the Iran deal, right? They had a deal and then now the US has pulled out. So long-term sustaining of whatever agreement is reached, I think, is also something very important for us to consider, which is why I think our campaign is really focused on education, community education, reaching out to members of Congress, so that we can begin to shift our thinking a little bit. I mean, Professor Chang asked the question about what is one of the challenges. When I go to, first of all, when you go to Washington, D.C. to meet with members of Congress, we don't actually meet with the members of Congress, we meet with the staff people, and we get 15 minutes to lay out our case, right? And, you'll be surprised how many times I get the question, do Koreans really want peace? What kind of question is this? Of course we want peace, right? But really, I mean, the level of sort of, first of all, Korea is not a priority for most members of Congress, right? And then even if it is, the level of knowledge is so low. But through the advocacy work that people are doing in the districts, one thing we realize is that, most members of Congress have never heard from their Korean American constituents on any issue, let alone this issue, right? So when Korean Americans go and say, I am a constituent and I care about this issue, actually that is great power in that, because this is completely new information for most people that we talk to. So we're trying to encourage this, and a lot of the people that we work with are housewives, ordinary Korean Americans, and they always say, I don't really speak English well, and I'm not an expert on this issue. How can I go and meet with a congressperson and talk about this issue? And I say, you don't have to be an expert. You go speak in Korean and have someone translate for you. All you have to do is, I am a voter in your district and I care about this issue. That's it, right? And we have found that actually that is actually very powerful, and we're encouraging more people to do that. Not only, I mean, starting with this issue, but on other issues as well. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Jan. We're gonna get only last questions from our audience right here.
Well, I'm a lucky man. Well, let me go back, start with, my name is Gabriel Okoye. As many of you know, the immediate past chairman of the Democratic Party in Gwinnett County. And currently I'm a candidate for State Senate in District 9. And I'm going back to the question that was posed to Representative Sam Park. I'd like to know what the Republican plan is to end the war and to sustain peace, so we can support it if it's a good one. If anybody knows, please let me know, because I don't even know that they have one too. I guess what I'm saying is the lady that used to vote Democrat, continue to vote. Help us to make the plan work. Right, now, what I actually wanted to say is to suggest a way we can make this movement work, because peace, when it's in Korea, and I'm not saying North or South, Korea, right, is peace in the world. Peace anywhere must be encouraged. But here's what I have come to find out. We have so many communities that have different issues, and each one is just going by themselves alone, and it diminishes the number. I'm working on bringing all the leaders of the various communities in Gwinnett together so that we can combine the numbers, because listen, it's still going to take a political solution to get this done. And politics is a game of what? Numbers. So if we all come together through the leadership of most of the communities here, and you are able to educate each other on at least one issue that's most pressing for your community, and you can combine forces. Can you imagine when all the leaders of the various communities here in Gwinnett go to visit Rep. Sam or Senator Butler? I mean, when Brenda becomes a congresswoman, you go to visit her and tell her this is what we want. Guess what? She knows the numbers, and she or he is going to jump on it. That is how I think this gets to be done. If we keep going at it by community, the numbers are not there, and the politicians don't pay that much attention when the numbers are not so threatening. So let's threaten them with numbers. Thank you.
This is such a great discussion with the fantastic panelists. I feel like my background is gone today. Okay. So please just keep in mind that the Koreans are really suffering. And also, if you promote peace in Korean Peninsula, that also promote the peace of the world. So thank you so much for coming today, and then thank you so much one more time for the all panelists.